Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's presentation. My name is Evangelysm, and you are listening to the Evangelysm podcast, and I'm here to share with you my love of raiding for priests and generally having fun in the world of Warcraft and spending too much time in Azeroth, the Outlands, and more recently, Draenor. Today is Tuesday the 17th of March 2015, and in today's show I'll be covering the news, Talk, which is all about class balance, my mailbox, and finally, this is how we do it, which this week is covering the level 90 or the tier 6 priest talents. But first, my weekly update on what I've been up to inside the game and in the real world. The past week I've mostly been leveling with Druid again, the PvP Druid, but in fact I'm still actually mostly leveling it through Herbalism while waiting for Battlegrounds. I've also been doing the herbing and the cooking and the fishing and the pet battle dailies again while waiting for Battlegrounds. Seriously, nobody does Battlegrounds at low levels. I may just have to give up on the project completely and rebadge it as a herbing leveling system. But never mind. But that's that one. I've also been doing my Garrisonless Shaman. I actually done something on it this week. I got another level and I've now exhausted everything in Shadowmoon Valley. There's no quests, there's no scenario bonus event things. There is nothing left to do. I've killed all of the rares, found all of the treasures, and I need to move on. So that's what I'll be doing next week, is moving on to the next zone. On my Dwarven Evelix 2, again, I've neglected her. I've logged on to do garrison stuff, and that's about it. So nothing to report there. But in raiding news for the Guild of Exhumed on Shadowsong EU, yes, we are recruiting. We're looking for a paladin healer. If you're a paladin healer, come on down. But I digress. We are now 8 of 10 in Blackrock Furnace in heroic mode. We defeated the maidens this week. It was a good fight. And we even had a look at Blast Furnace. He's a little bit tougher than we were imagining. We've killed him. Obviously, we've killed him on normal. We've cleared Blackrock Foundry on normal. It's a lot different. There's a lot more ads. The timings are got to be learned, and we've got to learn how to do all the ads. But hopefully Blast Furnace will go down in the next week, maybe 2. And then we're looking at the big fella at the back, Blackhand. I've also finally got my 4-piece set bonus, which for Discipline doesn't seem that good. I might try and embrace what it's doing, which is reduces the cost of Prayer of Healing by 50% under the influence of Archangel for 6 seconds. So I might try that, see how Spirit Shell works on certain fights. Grill's a good one for that one. But I really don't seem getting much use out of that. I really don't. It might be good for Holy. I might even take a look at Holy because I'm getting my backside kicked on some fights by our Holy Priest. But that all depends on us getting the aforementioned Paladin that we were trying to recruit because I am the shield healer at the moment. As I said last week in Exhumed, I was made GM. Our Guildmaster still hasn't actually logged on to actually hand over the reins. So Kenny, please, come on. I know you don't listen, but I'm going to beg here and sort of odd hope that you might stumble across the podcast. But no, I have been seriously, I have been talking to the guy. As I said, he's a long-time friend since I joined the guild. We speak often out of the game, well, mostly out of the game now. And we're moving along, and hopefully I will become GM. There's a few tweaks I need to do once we've got the GM role actually in game. Repair costs are a little bit of an issue at the moment because no money in. Repair costs are really high this expansion, and we're just wanting to tone them down a bit so the guild doesn't go bankrupt. What can I say? Next piece, Hearthcast. Hearthcast. I made an appearance last night on Hearthcast doing that AoE little quiz show thing. I was really not with it last night, so Root and Freck, I'm really sorry. I could have been a lot more outgoing than I was, and I did fail you. But so listen to the Hearthcast podcast, which you can download at hearthcast.com. So try that. It was only a small appearance, only, like I say, doing the Hearthcast AoE quiz. It's a quiz where you don't have to be exactly right to win. So they're all number-based questions, and 2 people head-to-head answer questions, what they think the answers are. Closest one wins on each question. kind of different. I like it. It's the second time I've appeared there. I won't spoil the result. So, yeah, take a look and watch. Listen. In real life has been really sort of good to me the last few weeks. And there's some big changes in the brewing. I won't say they're definitely happening because they're still in the brewing stage. But there's some really good stuff for me personally. And I'm really hoping that they all pan out as I hope and as my sponsor hopes, we'll call them. But it may force a change to the way the show's done. At the moment I do the show during the daytime. It's bright and sunny-ish outside, but that might have to change because of what's happening. But it's a recorded show, so hopefully you won't actually notice any difference. It might just mean that there's a week I skip it while I make the transition from what I'm doing now to what I may have to be doing in the future. So yeah, everything's sort of fluid on that. I'm doing what we call a Johnson. But yeah, watch this space. Hopefully you guys won't be impacted by it, and hopefully I will have some good news for you all in a week or two. But now, the news. In the news this week, there's been lots and lots of news. More news than I could ever hope for, in a way. So, first off, we'll start with a nice, easy one. BlizzCon is happening this year on the 6th and the 7th of November. Obviously, it's in Anaheim, as always, at the Anaheim Convention Center. Tickets are unchanged in their price. $199. That's US dollars, not the European variety. That works out to be about £140 in the UK at the moment. So that's not cheap. It's not cheap. Tickets going on sale in 2 batches, as they've done in the previous years, with a company called Eventbrite. I believe they were the ones that did it last year. Not 100% sure, but I'm sure they were. Ticket sales, the times for them here in the UK and EU are pretty awful. The first one, the big one, which is 3 a.m. British Summer Time, which would make that 4 a.m. in continental Europe. So not very good for us, I'm afraid, but that's on the 16th of April, by the way. And the other one, the other event, is actually a very, very convenient time for us British people. It's 6 p.m. So just as everyone gets home from work, sitting down to do their tea, their business and raiding and that sort of thing, on the 18th of April, that won't be happening because we're all going to be wanting to get BlizzCon tickets. Well, sadly, I won't. I've actually just been pricing it up. And for me to go over to BlizzCon on my own, which probably wouldn't be a good move with the she-dragon, the wife, it would cost me £1,600 for a week away. Unfortunately, as much as I would value that money, well spent, my wife wouldn't. Because she would want to come with me, and she wouldn't want to go to BlizzCon. So she would be lumbered with making her own way, probably around Disney for 2 days on her own. Not very nice. Not very nice at all. So that is not likely to happen this year. Next year, I may push the boat out. I may give a prod. Shall we go here? Because I really do. I've never been to the US, and one of the things I've always wanted to do is go to America. But BlizzCon would be a dream. It would be a dream come true. But BlizzCon itself, what is the speculation? Well, I don't know. No one's actually announced anything, but I've got this sneaky little feeling that there could be a major announcement at BlizzCon this year when they announce the next expansion is coming out in March. What? Well, yes, to coincide with the film. It makes perfect sense, really. Now we've got the timing of BlizzCon, everything sort of lines up nicely. We've got Black Rock Foundry out now. That leaves us, what month are we in now? 8 months now between now and BlizzCon. And then technically 4 or 5 months between BlizzCon and when I'm now saying that the expansion's coming out. Now that would work because at BlizzCon they can announce, here's the beta. Everyone have a look at the new beta, open beta. 5 months of open beta, as they've always done. Launch. It makes perfect sense. And the really good thing for that is the timing would actually work. Because we've had BlackRock Foundry for a month now. They've said that they want 6 or 7 months as a tier. So that'd be 6 months all the way up to September, would then be sort of when we're going to get 6.2. And then September to March is another 6 months for the end tier. It makes sense. It all works. It all fits in nicely with their 2-tier system. And it ties in fantastically for Blizzard with the launch of the film. It just makes sense for them to do it that way. If they don't do it that way, I will be shocked. But also at BlizzCon, there's lots of other things that they're going to announce. There's Overwatch beta will be coming out around that time. There's other things that they can be doing there. There's Hearthstone stuff. There'll be Hearthstone tournaments. No, we already know that it's the college thing, and I can't remember what they called it. It's the Hearthstone event where they're going to give away a prize of your future education, which is fantastic. Heroes of the Dorm, is it? Yeah, that's the one. Heroes of the Dorm. Thank you for that. So Heroes of the Dorm, they're going to launch that competition. They will have the StarCraft Championship, as they would do every year there. There will obviously be Heroes of the Storm as well. It just makes perfect sense. Everything lines up. Brilliant day. It's going to be a brilliant, brilliant weekend. And I do really, 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 really wish I was going. And I'm jealous of anyone that goes. I really am really, really jealous. I don't begrudge you going, but oh man, I wish I was going with you. I really do. But in other news, players in PvP combat now deal 10% less damage against each other. What is all that about? Seriously. I mean, PvP combat is something I enjoy in a group environment. I don't like duels because I'm a priest, I'm a healer. Really? Yeah, you're going to beat me. I've got no offensive abilities. Excuse me. I've got no offensive abilities. That sort of thing doesn't appeal. But seriously, 10% less damage against other players? Do they just want to make the combat go on longer? It makes no sense. It really does. If anything they want to nerf in PvP, it is crowd control. I do not notice any change in the crowd control. As a healer, I am stunned, I am rooted, I am silenced, I am gouged, I am sapped, I am immobilized half the freaking time. Change it, please. Really? 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 Yeah, really? Players already dealt enough damage. It wasn't too much. The problem is crowd control, not incoming damage. But Blizzard obviously see it differently. We'll see how it goes. Give it the benefit of the doubt. In raiding news, BlackRock Foundry has been mastered by 19 guilds now. They've all killed Mythic Blackhand. Congratulations to them all. Kings of the Roost are, of course, the EU guilds. There's 12 EU guilds that have killed Mythic Blackhand. There's 4 Chinese guilds, 2 Korean guilds, but still only 1 guild in the US. 3 of them have been Alliance, 16 of them have been Horde. What does this tell us about the game? Well, I think what it means is that generally there are no faction imbalances with regard to certain races being more desirable for high-end raiders. Yes, I know that I've just said that, and that 15% of the guilds that have killed Mythic Blackhand are Alliance. But historically, it was always the Horde that were the stronger faction. And if the stronger faction aren't the weakest faction, the guilds have got no need to change sides. So I still think that there are no faction imbalances now. I think everything is settled because we are seeing more Alliance guilds come through. But I just don't think that we're going to see a quick shift because the Horde aren't the weakest faction. They're just as weak or as strong, whichever way you want to look at it, half full, half empty deal, as the Alliance. But the thing it does say is that the Alliance and the Horde are balanced. I've just said that. What it does mean, though, is that the EU side does seem to have the stronger player base. Whether it's because we're a younger player base here in the EU, and we've got more ability for our top-end players to take time off work, skive off school, whatever they do to get the time off to raid. Or whether it is just because the infrastructure in the EU is slightly better than the US, so we've got faster, more reliable internet. Does that make a difference? I think it probably does. But then I think the Koreans would walk the planet if that was the case, because they do have the most reliable internet in the world. So I don't know. I don't know why it is. I don't know. Perhaps we are just superhuman in the EU. I mean, we do get the content a whole day later. It makes a difference initially, but this far into the progression, it really makes no difference at all. So why are the US guilds lagging so far behind the EU? Who can tell? Who can tell? Blood Legion, of course, are not the US guild that have killed it. That was Midwinter. But Blood Legion have announced this week that they're now stepping back from progression raiding. And when I say stepping back from progression raiding, I would mean that I'm going casual and just doing really, really casual hours. Obviously, Blood Legion's casual, not forcing progression down, is a little bit different to my view. But they are taking this step back. They've been dealing with World First since 2011, I think it is. They've been at the cutting edge of raiding since the launch of the game. And one of the reasons that they've stated is because they've got a small roster. And the fact is that the players are hard to find, the quality of players that they need. And they just cannot commit to the mad hours that they have to put in to progress toward World Firsts. Whether that's the genuine reason, whether it's an excuse, I don't know. I'd like to believe Rignoros when he said it. We've heard the same thing from Paragon, interestingly, last expansion, which is when they went from 25 to 10. And that is the odd thing, because obviously Blood Legion have gone from 25 to 20, and to me that must have made their roster easier. Perhaps too many people wanted to step back. I don't know the inner workings of the guild, but they are leaving the World First race, at least now. For now, they've said. They may be back. Who can tell? Maybe they'll be secretly looking for really top-end raiders to make them the best guild in the US again. I mean, let's face it, they are the guild in 20th position. They are still the odds-on favourite for a World First Horde US kill. So they're no mugs. They are really no mugs. And I'm sure they will be raiding what I would call mad hours, and what some of you probably call mad hours as well. They'll probably be raiding only 5 hours a night, 7 days a week. Who can tell? But that's better than the 17 hours a day, 7 days a week that they would have been putting in early on in the progression race for Blackrock Foundry. Moving on, we've got a confirmation post from Blizzard saying that your alts will get legendary drops faster than your main. This is really bizarre, because back in Pandaria, everyone of their dog was moving through the progression for the legendary cloak so fast that, I mean, I had it on 7 characters, I think, and I didn't try harder. There was a gentleman in our guild who had it on 14 or 15 players, if I remember rightly. He had it on every character on Alliance, every character on Horde, and I just couldn't understand how anyone could do it. But Blizzard heard our whines, our complaints, our feedback, whatever you want to call it, and made it easier for our alts to get the legendary ring. I don't agree with that personally. I think that if you're raiding at a certain level, your drop should be guaranteed. Mythic raiders should get 1 drop rate, a heroic raider should get another, a normal raider should get another, and LFR shouldn't get a guaranteed drop. It should be a rare chance of a drop. You shouldn't get the drops in your work orders. You shouldn't get them from missions. You should get them from running the content that needs the ring. And I've been very much in this mindset from the beginning. If you do not need the gear to do the progression that you're progressing on, content that you're progressing on, you shouldn't get the equipment to do it. Why should someone who doesn't raid have raid level gear? There's no need. There is no need. They should be getting gear that enables them to step into raiding, so that they can then get the gear that they need to kill the second boss and the third boss and so on. Yes, I agree with that. But the harder the content you run, the bigger the reward should be, and the faster you should get your progression on something like the legendary rings and the legendary cloaks. It makes sense. Effort and reward. I mean, again, I've got a guy in our guild who isn't a heroic raider. He raids normals with us on a Sunday and Monday. He got lucky in Highmore, and he was one of the first people in our guild, despite the fact that our heroic raiders were running the heroic content. He was the first person to get the ring upgrade. And again, because he's done that, before Blackrock Foundry even came out, he was a sixth of the way through the drops for the needed for getting the upgrade to 700. Seriously? Why? I mean, again, I don't begrudge him. It's the system that's at fault. He's done nothing wrong. He's just, you played the game as he needs to. But why should people that are raiding be punished because they are doing harder content? They shouldn't be. They should be rewarded more for it. The obvious other fix would be to have each boss kill give you X amount of whatevers, alligator stones or elephants, runes or whatever they are, but you should get them off of each difficulty. So if you go run through normal, you'll get three drops. If you run through heroic, you'll get 3 drops. But you have the chance to run heroic and normal and therefore get 6 drops. That makes sense as well. Again, reward effort. I don't know. I really don't understand why Blizzard does some of the things they do. I understand they need to keep everyone happy. I really do, but I don't understand why they seem to punish the more hardcore players, the people that are running the hardcore, and I'm using birdie quotes here, hardcore content, which is the more difficult content. Hotfix for this week. There was one bug fix on Blackhand. His Siegemaker's battering ram is no longer considered to be an AoE attack, and that is on all difficulties. That's in effect on all difficulties, all 3. And I don't understand really what this change does, but they've done it. It's a direct physical attack rather than an AoE attack. It probably means that pets will get hurt by it, and it probably doesn't get reduced by things like avoidance and versatility. I don't know. It's a odd change in my eyes. Now, I'm going to skip over the next thing that I've got on my list because I want to talk more deeply about it after the priest bit. So, in priest news this week, we've had a bug fix, which means that Cascade will now properly use the casting priest's multi-strike chance for bonus bounces beyond the first one. I'm guessing from the way it's worded that the multi-strike chance was calculated on the person that it bounced off of. So if I bounced my Cascade off of me onto the tank and then onto a rogue, my bounce to the tank would count at my multi-strike because it's the first bounce, because it's bounced off of me. I've cast it on myself, bounced onto the tank. But the rogue's amount of healing is determined by the multi-strike chance of the tank. And if that's the case, it's really odd. And I understand why they fixed it. Now, the final piece of news, though, is the bit that I've just skipped over, which is a hotfix is going to be put in place this week that will increase the item level of all raid drops from all difficulties of the Blackrock Foundry raid. Now, Blizzard's methodology behind this is that it's currently unrewarding for people that have gone from one content difficulty of High Maul onto the lower difficulty of the Blackrock Foundry raid. So, as happens with my guild, in exchange we've run a heroic High Maul on our main raids, and we did a little bit of mythic. And when we moved into Blackrock Foundry, we did go straight into heroic mode, but most of our raiders also joined the Sunday Monday group who run normal. And in the Sunday Monday group, on normal, we were getting 665 item level drops, which were actually upgrades on some of our 670 gear from High Maul. Because of the item level change was so small, the loss, that the stats that were, the secondary stats that were on the items could be seen as upgrades, especially if you've got tiered loot, which is how my 4-piece tier is. I've got 2 pieces from High Rock, Heroic Blackrock Foundry, and I've got 2 pieces from normal Blackrock Foundry to give me my 4-piece set bonus. Now what's going to happen there is that I had to lose 2 items that were 670 to get 665 items to upgrade them. And Blizzard have gone, do you know what, that's not really rewarding, is it? And they're going to buff those 2 items this week to 670. Now, I actually disagree, because I'm running easier content than I was running before. I've gone from Heroic High Maul to normal Blackrock Foundry. And whatever way Blizzard try and pretty it up, they've done this as a nerf to the existing content. They've denied that that's the reason behind it, and they've denied that it is actually a nerf. But if I'm getting half of my gear upgraded by 5 item levels, that's a big, big change to my healing output. For a tank, it's a big change to their damage incoming and their damage output. And for a DPS, again, it's a pure and unashamed increase to their damage output. Things are going to die easier. On a fight where we may have to heal 5 heal a fight, because we've got 23 people in the raid, we may now only be able to get away with 24, which means we'll kill it even faster. And I really dislike this. And there's arguments going around that it's because that Blackrock Foundry is a different tier, and it's not tier as in tier armour, it's just a different raid zone. And I think this is where the problem has actually started, because what they've done is they put 2 different item levels in. And they had to do this, I guess, because they stagger the release. Even by a few weeks, you've got one raid dungeon and another raid dungeon coming out a few weeks later, and the only way to make its appeal is to have higher item levels. And I don't like that. I think that's wrong. What they should do is they should have just come out from the beginning and said, okay, Blackrock Foundry is the same tier of raiding. It's the same difficulty of raiding. Some bosses in Blackrock are easier than some bosses in Highmore. They should have released them together, and the progression may have to be that you kill 4 bosses in Highmore, and then go to 4 bosses in Blackrock Foundry, and then back to the last 3 bosses in Highmore, and then back to the last 6 bosses in Blackrock Foundry. It's happened before. We had exactly that situation in Cataclysm, in fact we had 3 raid instances there, and that was good. It gave us variety. We were hitting their faces against a wall, and you had the choice to go, do you know what? I don't want to do this. We'll go and kill another boss in another raid zone and get a change of scenery. And it would have been great. Yeah, that would have been fantastic. Do that, Blizzard. Everyone's happy. Well, you could have had the same item levels then. We could have been at 670 in Heroic Blackrock Foundry. And Watcher, who made the post about it, said that one of the reasons was that it's unrewarding to move into killing a boss who is harder than the previous boss you've killed. Well, if that's the case, surely what they need to be doing is every boss drops a different item level of gear. Yeah? Because the first bosses, Kargath in Highmore, everyone killed him. We 2-shot him, I think, on the first raid night in 630 gear. We may have even 1-shot him. He did not feel like a challenge. He did not feel like a raid boss. And yet we got 670 gear for him, and we got 670 gear for killing Imperator Margok. I believe that's his name. And yet the boss difficulty is huge. There is a massive difficulty. So what we need to have there is a tiered progression of item levels. Every boss you kill is another item level higher, maybe. Would that work? Well, I remember back in the day, Sonny, back in the day in Naxxramas, killing the last boss gave you a higher item level of gear because it was meant to be a bonus for killing the last boss. It was only 3 item levels higher, but hey, it made a difference. You loved that loot off the last boss. It gave everyone a reason to want to be on the last boss. So do that. Make it just so that the last boss of every raid tier gives you a higher item level. Because right now, Blizzard have removed the need to go back into Highmore unless you're running normals. And if you're running normals, all you need to go into Highmore for is mythic progression. And I'm sorry, but any guild that's killing bosses on normal is not ready for mythic progression, even on the previous raid instance. It's just not viable. The players aren't aware enough, because if they were aware enough, they would be running heroic content. And that's sad, because Highmore is a fine raid, and there are currently upgrades for me in Highmore if I run mythic. But tomorrow, I'm assuming it's going to come on the reset, so it'll come on, in fact tonight, it will come that Mythic Highmore offers nothing for me because of the upgrades that I get will be exactly the same tier or item level of loot as I get now in Heroic Blackrock Foundry. It's a nerf. It really is beyond belief that they've done it because it's removing content. And one of the things that I've always liked about raiding is that you've got this clear progression from one dungeon to another. And Wrath really messed that progression level up because it meant the way that they made loot casual friendly was the fact that you could just jump tiers. If as a newly dinged level 80, you could miss out Naxxramas, Malagos, Sartharian 3D, Ulduar, Trial of the Crusader, and go straight into Icecrown. All of this current content is just vanished, and that's the way that the game just works now, that content is outdated as soon as the next raid tier comes out, as soon as the next raid instance comes out. It's just a shame that Blizzard put all of this time into development stuff, and then they outdate their stuff. I mean, Highmore has been in the game 4 months, 5 months at a push, and yet now it's gone. It's obsolete. The only way it's kept actually current is by the need to go and get Abrogator Stones to get the Legendary Ring quest underway, and that is a shame. So that needs fixing. It really does. I'm sure it won't get fixed, and people will just have to run LFR for their Abrogator Stones because, as we've already heard from Blizzard, you get more legendary drops on your ults, so that won't happen for very long as well. But that is the news, and that is an extended news mainly because of the item level nerf, but because there was quite a lot to talk about there. So now it's time for my main event, my topic of the week. Let's talk about class balance. So, if you remember from last week's show, Dan, or Yami, or at the Steakhouse, wrote in and asked all about my thoughts on class balance in, I nearly said Mr. Pandaria, in Warlords of Draenor. Now, at the time I said that it was quite a lengthy subject to cover as a mail time item, so I've decided to make it this week's feature of the show. Now, I was trying to think how to actually lay this out. So what I've done is I've broken the classes down into 3 groups based on their role in a raid, whether they're healers, tanks, or DPS. And as I mainly play a healer, I'm starting with the good old healers, because everyone loves a healer, yeah? Indeed. Now, I've heard many people whining on the forums, whining on Twitter, whining on podcasts even, about how OP or overpowered many classes are. The main targets of these are Disc Priests and Paladins, and Resto Druids. Well, to be fair, some fights, Resto Druids are overpowered. On some fights, Disc Priests and Paladins are overpowered. On other fights, Shaman are overpowered. And I'm sure there are fights where a Mistweaver Monk is the overpowered healer. And what does this prove? Or what does it show? What it shows to me is that Blizzard have made encounters for every type of healer, which is good. It's got to be good, yeah? I mean, Disc Priests and Paladins are overpowered on some fights because they're not actually healers, in effect now. They are mitigators. They prevent damage. So on fights, and a good one from recent tiers is Gruul and the Butcher. Paladins and Priests are ace at that fight because we know when the next group is going to start taking damage, and we can shield them up in preparation of them taking that damage. The damage comes in, shields get eaten up, and hey presto, what should be a really massive hit on the group is just a little tickle that the Resto Druids and the Shaman and the Holy Priests and the Mistweaver Monks can heal up the slack while we're now looking after the next group who are going to get the massive amounts of damage on them. That's brilliant. I mean, that is brilliant. On the meters, when you look at it, the Disc Priests and the Paladins will be sat there looking all smug, and the Resto Druids and the Holy Priests and all of those healers that actually heal sit there looking like chumps. It's how it works. Unless, of course, the mitigators, as I'll call them, have failed in their job and they've got the wrong group at the wrong time. And it happens. I've done it myself. And then there's other fights where the damage incoming is so consistent and so high, and Blackhand's a good example of this, even on normal. A shield healer is just pretty much pointless. We shield people to stop them taking more damage once they're damaged, because the damage incoming is pretty constant throughout the fight. You shield people, but there's people always at low health. And here's where the real healers shine, the Druids, the Monks, your Shaman, the Holy Priests. They shine in those fights because they've always got a missing part of health on players to fill up. It's what those fights are there for. They are there for the real healers, not the mitigators. And that just produces a synergy between certain types of healer. I mean, our raid team, I'm a Disc Priest, obviously. We did have 2 Paladins, but we had 3 other healers. We had a Resto Shaman, a Holy Priest, and a Resto druid, and we complement each other all the while on all of the fights that you encounter. There's heals to be healed up, there's shields to be put out there, and everything just works. It's perfect. It's what healing is all about. Healing isn't all about topping the meters. In fact, nothing is about topping the meters, but I'll cover that in a minute. But a healer topping the meters means that one of the other healers is slacking, or we're under healing the fight and the other healers are working their nuts off to actually make things happen quickly and not cause wipes. And that's just basically what I love about healing. It's not a numbers game. It really isn't. It's a cooperation. It's a team-based game of keeping people alive. Keeping people alive doesn't ever show up on a damage meter, or healing meter in this case. It never shows that heal that you put on someone when they were at 2 HP. It never shows that. You cannot see that on a healing meter, that you saved someone's life. And that could be the only major thing that you did in that fight. But you saved someone's life who then went on to kill the boss. I mean, an emergency heal like that on a tank can be a wipe saver, and it could be the most important heal of the night. But that might have come from the guy that wasn't the perfect healer for that particular fight and wasn't responding well on the numbers when you look at the meters. But that guy has just laid out there and put his skills on the line and saved that tank at the right time. A lay on hands, pain suppression, guardian spirit, that sort of thing. You just cannot see that on meters. But that's why I love healers, and that is why I will always be a healer, because it's not a race, it's not a big e-ping contest, it's all about skill and judgment. But for me, Dan, healers are balanced. There isn't really much that you could change on healers that would make things better. I mean, as a priest, I'm in a wonderful position where if I wanted to, I could change spec on certain fights to achieve certain goals. And priests are possibly, therefore, the overpowered healing class, because they are the class with 2 healing specs. But it's because they've got 2 specs, you can have the best of both worlds. You can be the mitigator on fights where mitigation's king, and you can be a healer where the actual return of health is the game winner. So we'll move on to tanks. Tanks are a little bit tougher to assess, in my opinion, because basically because I'm not playing one at the moment, but because they're also more skill-based than class-based. What I mean by that is someone who's playing a tank has to play at a certain skill level. They cannot hide the fact that they're a bad tank. Someone can play the worst class, which we'll call it a druid for now, because that's probably the weakest class at the moment, and be a really good druid tank. And they can be paired up with someone who is playing a monk, which is the most overpowered of the tanks at the moment, but plays it really badly. And you see the 2 in raids, and the monk is always dying. Now, you can look at the picture there and go, do you know what? Monks are really rubbish this expansion, because your experience is with monk tanks, that they die a lot. And I've had this before. Back in Firelands, I was healing a tank who was a Death Knight, and the Death Knight was the overpowered tank class in there as a tank. But this guy didn't know what Death Strike was, and therefore wasn't getting his mastery bubble, his self-heal. His self-healing was less than a rogue's, and he died a lot. He did. And that just proves that it's all skill-based with tanks. So yes, I do find certain classes are better, and I prefer healing a tank with a shield, a proper physical shield, because I find the damage incoming is smoother and more predictable. And as a disc priest, I like the predictable damage because I don't have to waste all of my mana using flash heal. But they do have bigger problems, that when they take a big hit, they don't tend to have the self-heal capability like the other 3 do, Death Knight, Druid and Monk. Obviously the shield healers are Paladins and Warriors. And the thing with the non-shield hit tanks is the fact that they do have this massive spikiness. They'll take a big hit and almost be dead, and you'll think, panic heal, and you panic heal them up, and by the time you've cast it, they're back at full health because they've used one of their self-heals to put them back at full health. That is annoying, and it's just the way that the player plays that class. you get to know your tanks, and you get to know what you can panic heal and what you do need to panic heal. When you need to panic heal, you know about it, and you go, oh, cooldowns, that sort of thing. The DPS output for tanks, though, is ridiculously high. And this is one of the things that I thought that Blizzard were trying to remove, because monks especially have an annoying ability to top the meters because they've got Touch of Death. And if your tank's trigger happy and knows how to press that button really quickly, they can go from bottom of the meters to top of the meters on one tank, on one ability, because they hit Touch of Death, which deals their health to the mob once they're below 10% health. That's the mob below 10% health, not the tank. So currently our tank's got around 500,000 health. 500,000 damage in one global. That's ridiculous. Generally, the monk, though, is quite poor on damage until they can use that ability. Paladins, on the other hand, are a lot more consistent with their DPS, especially in big groups. And this applies pretty much to any tank anyway. The more they're tanking, the more their damage is, because they're hitting everything constantly. So paladins, as I was saying, do a lot of damage, but theirs is all smooth. Again, it's not that Touch of Death thing where they sit at the bottom of the meters and then hit one ability and they go to the top of the meters. Paladins are quite high consistently, but they do generally fall below the DPS unless there's lots of adds. Overall, through the two raid instances, High Maul was really good to have it was really good to have a paladin tank in High Maul, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's more physical damage that they're blocking or just because of the way that the fights work, but it seems that in Blackrock Foundry, monks are the king class. Now, I'm quite lucky because I've got a paladin and a monk as my main tank, and a warrior as our third tank, and they are probably the three best classes for tanking at the moment. Death Knights aren't far behind, but Druids are a long way behind, I think. But it's hard for me to really pass judgment on Druids because I haven't actually healed one this expansion in a raid, because we haven't got any Druid tanks. And I'm guessing the reason we haven't got many Druid tanks is because no one wants to play them. So in terms of balancing tanks, I'd say monks for Blackrock Foundry, paladins for High Maul, warriors is a good all-rounder, and Death Knights and Druids a little bit behind, more so with the Druid, but the Death Knight isn't a bad tank. They are very good all-round tanks as well, but if I was putting together a perfect tank team, and it has actually happened for our guild that we've got the three classes that I would choose, but that wasn't how it started out. It was because our Death Knight tank quit on us because of real life. He took a retirement, bless him. So yes, tanks aren't so balanced as healers. And now we move on to DPS. Now DPS has been sort of weird, because I've heard lots of people claim that certain classes are ridiculously overpowered, and other people claim that those classes that are underpowered compared to the rest, and the numbers really are a bit skewed. Now, I've been looking through our logs and the World of Logs general data, and it seems that there is a massive difference on AoE fights. So on a fight like Grill, the classes vary by 20%. So at the top end, you've got players doing 33,000 DPS, and at the bottom end, you've got people doing 26,000. And this is of the average DPSer. It isn't the best of the best. It isn't the worst of the worst. It's Joe Average in the middle there. They're doing a regular job, playing the regular game in an even way. He's not bad. He's not good. If you know what I mean. When I say he's not good, he's not awesome. He's Mr. Average. He's doing 33,000 at the top end, whereas Mr. Average at the bottom end is doing 26k. Now, the king classes for single target DPS are Feral Druids, Subtlety Rogues, and Hunters. At the bottom end of that scale, you've got Arms Warriors, Destruction Locks, and Fire Mages. In the middle is everyone else. And it's a 20% split from top to bottom. So again, looking at the middle, you've got 10% above, 10% below. And that is what you would expect. It's not what you'd hope for, but that is pretty much what Blizzard always deliver. Now, looking at an AoE fight, I looked at maidens because that fight tends to be more consistent AoE. Not something like Blast Furnace where there's ads everywhere and strategy can pay a big difference in it. With the Iron Maidens, you've got the 2 targets up all of the while, barring when you kill them at the end, and 3 targets up most of the time. And here was a big shock, because the top end players, or classes in this case, is actually doing 41,000 DPS. The bottom end is doing 25. Now that to me is very odd. How a class that can do 26k single target can be doing 25k on a multi-target is a bit odd. So the numbers might not quite be accurate there. But overall, you've still got a 40% split. So you've got 41,000 at the top end, 25 at the bottom. So there's 40% difference between top and bottom. Now the top classes are monks, Storm, Wind and Fire, or Earth, Wind and Fire, whatever their talent is, that's probably why. Elemental Shaman, again, they are reasonably good at spreading damage. And Fire Mages, who are very good at spreading damage. Now, compare that to the bottom of the single target. It means a Fire Mage has gone from worst to best, because the Fire Mage was bottom of the pile on single target, but he's good with his 3 targets. Now, at the bottom end of the AoE stuff, we've got Frost Death Knights, Arcane Mages, and Destrolocs. Now, the poor old Destroloc does seem to be the weakest class and spec, because they're worst on single target and they're worst on AoE. So what are they good for? Absolutely nothing, as Frankie Goes to Hollywood would say. So, really and truthfully, it does seem to be that single target is all melee or physical damage, whereas magic damage is better on AoE, except for monks. There's always the odd one there. And I really don't understand the race for DPS. I mean, yes, DPS is needed, and there are people that play their classes really well. We've got a few of them in our guild. One of our hunters and one of our shaman in particular. Our feral druid isn't bad either. Bless her. But for me, damage output is only part of the game. And yes, I mean, yeah, you do need a bare minimum damage output. But if you are doing enough damage to kill a boss, then you're doing okay. Obviously, more damage kills bosses faster, and it helps progression. But as long as you're not hitting enrage timers, you're doing a reasonable job. And people need to understand that sometimes people are not as good at DPS as you are, but they're also better at other stuff in the game. They could be better at avoiding damage. They could be better at putting out extra heals here and there. There's more to the game than pure numbers, and that is what separates the men from the boys. Ideally, you want someone who is great, and that's where the progression guilds have people. They have people that can put out massive numbers, take minimal damage, and toss out heals and dispels and that thing along the way. And those players, if you've got one of those, hold on to them, love them, cherish them, never let them escape from your guild, because they are the ones that will make a difference on your raid nights. But anyway, I'm drifting away from the subject. Balance on DPS does vary between fight to fight. If you want anything to be perfectly consistent, bring hunters, and bring druids. Druids aren't bad either. They're good on single target if you can make them spec feral. They're not too bad on the AoE type fights if you can make them spec boomkin. And of course there are other fights where it's good to be ranged, over good to be melee and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, the balance of DPS is wide and it varies on fight type. So I hope that answers your question, Dan. I've rambled on way too long on that bit because I'd rambled on way too much earlier on with the item level stuff. So that will conclude this week's Talk. There is more to the show, though. There is more to the show. We need to move on to mail time.
There's a letter in your mailbox.
This week I have no actual emails, but I do have a tweet which provided a correction to something from last week's show from Cyan, who is at _3SKE on Twitter. He says, quick note on the show, Divine Insight does make Prayer of Mending instant, although it isn't reflected in the tooltip. Well, thanks for that, Cyan. I feel really silly now, but in my defence, I've never used the talent, this expansion, and I haven't played Holy this expansion either, which I really should do. It's something I want to do, so thanks for the correction, and if you're listening and heard last week's show, Divine Insight does actually become quite good with Prayer of Mending becoming instant, because it makes it work as it used to do. So that might actually make it a very good talent, regardless of whether you're running Holy or Discipline. So take a look at it and give it a nudge. So that is the end of mail time. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask me, please email me at podcast@evelix.co.uk or via either one of my Twitter accounts. The show account is @evangelismcast, that's EVANGELYSMCAST, or via my personal Twitter, which is @Evelix, EVLYXX. And today's show will be wrapped up with my tip section, which is all about the Tier 6 or the Level 90 talents. In this week's This Is How We Do It, we're looking at the Tier 6 or the Level 90 talents. This tier has a total of 3 choices, regardless of whether you're Holy, Discipline or Shadow. The first option is Cascade, which is a fountain of heals for our healers, or a fountain of damage for our damage, if you're Shadow. So it used to be that the Cascade would bounce off of friendly targets, off of unfriendly targets, whatever was in the way, and it would heal the friendlies, and it would do damage to the enemies, which was great. But Blizzard decided to change that, as they have done with the other 2 options as well, at the beginning of Warlords. And Cascade is a good option when you've got people that may be grouped up or maybe spread far apart. It's the sort of what we call the default option in this tier. Now, the other options you have are Divine Star and Halo. Now, Divine Star is really good when you've got either enemies if you're a Shadow Priest, or your friends, your group, your raid in close proximity to you and you're all bunched up. So I'm trying to think of a fight recently. The best fight for this ever was Thok. All of the group, the melee, the ranged, the healers were all stood in a big lump on Thok's side while the tank was tanking them in the face. And Divine Star was there, and it was able to rush through every single person in the raid, hit the boss, and come back and do even more healing. And as a disc priest, it was godlike, because you just pressed this button on cooldown. It couldn't be interrupted. If you'd been stupid and got interrupted, it still worked. You could still cast it even if you were silenced, and it would just run through everyone and come all the way back. It would heal people. It would put divine aegis on everyone. Godlike. And it was a brilliant, brilliant spell. And it still is. It's a lot weaker now. In fact, the best fight at the moment is probably Orgorger, because we've got the range group stacked up, moving out of the puddles, and you bounce it, and you bounce it towards the tanks and the melee. It hits everyone in ranged, everyone in melee, and comes all the way back, doing exactly the same thing as it does on Thok. So that's brilliant. Now, for a Shadow Priest, I don't know what's a good fight for it. Probably something like Thogar is really good for Divine 8 Star on that one, because you get all these mobs every now and again and they're all grouped up, rather than the next spell, which is Halo, which is a big disc of heals or damage. Now, Halo is really good for when everyone is spread out miles away, 40 yards preferably, because Halo deals more damage or does more healing the further your target is away from you when you cast it. So as a priest, if you choose Halo and then you stood right next to someone and you want to press the button, the person stood next to you is going to get some healing, but it won't be much. Whereas the person stood 40 yards away will get a crap ton of healing when it hits them. And the same thing works obviously for Shadow Priest, but obviously it's damage and not healing. So a Shadow Priest stood 40 yards away from the boss would normally choose Halo, even if there's only one target it's going to hit, because when it hits that one target, it's going to do the maximum amount of damage, and that's it. And that's what Halo does. And it works, as I say, the same for healing as well. So it hits all the targets in between you and the boss, or you and 40 yards away, and it heals everyone's. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, that it no longer does both healing and damage, because Halo was great for Disc Priests, because it would do the healing and to all of your allies, damage to all of the enemies, and it put shields on people because it's such a fantastic spell. It is brilliant. It is a brilliant, brilliant spell when people are spread everywhere. And a good fight for it now, in fact, is something like Black Hand, because people tend to get scattered to the four corners of the room. And it is just a brilliant, brilliant spell. I mean, come on, it's a great big disc of healing or damage if you're a shadow. But yeah, that's why I use it occasionally, but my default option is Cascade. There are times when the others are useful, but as I say, my default option is Cascade. Anyway, folks, that is the end of the tip section for this week. That is the end of the show. But before we go, I'd like to thank you all for being a wonderful, wonderful audience. My congregation, you are wonderful people. Please get in touch with the show. I'd love to hear your feedback on the show itself. And of course, my topic of the week, my Talk subjects. Next week's show, I'll be looking at the standard Blizzard UI and why I personally don't use it. I'd love to hear, though, whether you use the standard UI, and if you do, or even if you don't, your reasons for using it or not using it. So please do get in touch with the show by email to podcast@evelix.co.uk, or alternatively via Twitter to the show email Twitter account, which is at evangelismcast. That's at EVANGELYSMCAST, or to me personally at Evelix, which is EVLYXX. As I said, folks, you've been wonderful, wonderful audience. Please do come back next week. You've been wonderful. I've been me. Good night, goodbye, good afternoon, whatever time of day it is. Have fun, folks.